Welcome to the Just Ingredients podcast. I'm Layne, and here we talk all things nourishing to the mind, body, and soul. This is a place where you can find just good ingredients to life. Pharmacist Layne Kilpatrick, known as the hormone specialist on social media, has practiced as a compounding pharmacist for 35 years and a clinical pharmacist in the area of hormone therapy for the last 20 years. He currently owns and operates Mount Olympus Compounding Pharmacy in Draper, Utah. He specializes in the sex hormones and is a consultant to practitioners on case management, lab interpretation, hormone dosing, and optimal routes of administration and dosage forms. He has a special interest and has posted extensively in social media on hormone disruptors found in the environment and the confounding factor they introduce into the function and nurturing of the mind and body. He is passionate about empowering people to rise up from passive consumption of what big food, big pharma, big business, big ag, and big government dish out, and take back control. Precautionary consumption should rule. He recently launched a podcast called You, Chief Medical Officer. He would say, do not trust, verify. In all his educational efforts, his mantra is gearing you up to tell the world, I decide. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, I am excited for our guest because he has blown up on social media recently. He is a pharmacist, like the bio said, but he teaches all the same type of stuff that I teach, and I love that there's others out there fighting for the same things I'm fighting for. And so welcome to the show, Layne, and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. There can't be too many of us in this arena, I don't think.
I don't either. We need more people speaking out about all the stuff that's being put in our food and beauty products and all sorts of things. And we're going to talk about some of that today. But before we begin, will you just tell my listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, what you do, things like that?
You bet. So I'm a graduate of the U of U College of Pharmacy back in '89. I've owned and operated a community pharmacy, compounding pharmacy for most of that time. I've had some pretty significant post-grad training in hormone therapy. A lot of hormone therapy gravitates to compounding pharmacies because it's just the nature of getting those prescription products that are not available commercially. But so I chose to get into this training along with the same training that practitioners and prescribers take, so that I could relate better, I could support their patients better. And so I have a certification in that in advanced bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, the same one that they get. So that's been helpful to me and very, very interesting and fulfilling for my career. I have to tell you kind of what got me started on the subject of estrogenics and hormone disruptors. In my practice here, I have an office here in my pharmacy, and I spend a lot of time with patients, and I just started noticing I'm seeing younger and younger people come in. It used to be kind of a middle-aged business, hormone replacement therapy, both mainly women at first, and then it's increased in men. But actually, I started seeing these younger people, college age sometimes, and some of them athletes, very, very fit actually, and in good physical shape and good health. Gosh, so I started wondering what is going on here, and then I went to a medical conference and I heard a guy named Anthony J. speak. He's a PhD biochemist, and he has this book called Estrogeneration. And as I read that, he talks about all these environmental impacts and chemicals and things that are playing into the mix here. So that corroborates what I'm seeing, and I realized, there's something to this. Between 1973 and 2011, sperm concentration, so that's the number of sperm per ml of semen, dropped by 52% among random men in the Western countries in general. Total sperm count dropped by more than 59%.
That's crazy.
That is. Sperm banks are a good place to look at sperm quality because their prime directive, obviously, is to collect viable sperm that will do the job, capable of conception and making a successful pregnancy. In one study, so they have to meet high standards, these donors. In one study, young adult college students in Boston 69% of these aspiring sperm donors made the cut in 2003. In 2013, only 44% made it.
Wow.
In spite of the fact that those in 2013 had improved lifestyles, less smoking, less alcohol consumption, better body weight, more exercise. So in spite of that fact, their fertility is still dropping significantly, and they don't qualify to be a donor. And then a similar study in China, qualified donors dropped from 56% in 2001 to 18% in 2015.
Wow.
Yeah, 2/3 decline. That's alarming. And so this is starting to align with me and go, okay, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing these young guys, and they don't know this until they go to have children. They think they're fine, and then turns out they're not. Testosterone levels have been falling by about 1% per year for the last about 50 years.
All of this is so crazy.
It is. It should be alarming, actually. So the birth rate in the U.S. has been below what's considered necessary to sustain our population since 2017. That has to be, they say, 2.1 children per couple. So to replace yourself and then, a little bit of extra spare. That should be alarming to people. It's way lower in some Asian countries. I think South Korea is about 0.8.
Wow. China
is down around that area too. So what's that going to do when we have now this, in our country, we call it baby boomers. They're moving out of the workforce, and who's going to contribute into that? So there's all kinds of sociological problems with that, in addition to just the concern that those that want to conceive and start a family now are having trouble.
Yeah, there are a lot of infertility issues going on right now. So I'm assuming you believe a lot of this is due to endocrine disruptors.
A lot of people will say, and a lot of doctors in this field will say, well, it's because we're more obese. Obesity decreases testosterone. It does. Okay, that's known. Sedentary lifestyle, smoking, alcohol consumption. But that took that into consideration, and it was still lower. So that tells me, okay, there's something out there that's contributing to this, and it's worldwide. It's not just here in the U.S.
Yeah.
So we're kind of left with these environmental impacts. So then I started looking into this, and I realized that, oh my goodness, there's such a body load of toxins and hormone disruptors that, people tend to think of these things in isolated cases where, okay, let's talk about BPA, something that used to be in water bottles is now mostly in plastics. And believe it or not, the biggest probably exposure for people is thermal receipts that you get from the store, the grocery store. They're looking at it and they say, well, there's not that much exposure from that. But then I said, so then let's add in some pesticides. Let's add in personal care products, shampoos, soaps, creams, moisturizers, all that sort of thing. The load starts to really add up. It turns out to be more significant than maybe it looks at first blush.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about endocrine disruptors because that's what you talk a lot about on social media, and you do a great job with that. And so let's just start at the basics first, and then we'll get into a lot of these different ones. But for those that are maybe new to this, will you just tell them, what are endocrine disruptors? And is this a newer thing today, or have they been around for a while?
Let's just back up one step first, and let's define the endocrine system. So the endocrine system is a broad network of glands, organs, and tissues whose purpose is to facilitate communication between the brain and the body. The brain is the master control, gets a nervous system input, and then needs to communicate to the body what needs to be done to modulate, to maintain homeostasis, to keep us going with the right amount of energy and everything else that we need. So hormones are the messengers in that system. For example, a guy starts a new training regimen, let's say, and he's now, the body perceives, or the brain perceives, he's got an increased workload. He's calling for more, he's working those muscles harder, calling for more energy for that. The brain senses that, sends a hormone down to the gland that's responsible for testosterone secretion. In men, that's the testes. Women, it's the adrenal glands. And then that gland in turn drops testosterone into the bloodstream. Testosterone circulates around, reaches the muscle, the cell and on the surface of the muscle cell is a receptor where the hormone fits like a lock and key, travels to the DNA, to the nucleus of the cell, and signals a change. In this case, we need protein synthesis. We need more muscle mass. We need more strength and more stability and endurance. And so that's what it does. When it gets enough of that to meet the new need, the brain senses that and brings it back down a little bit. That's kind of how it works. And then hormone disruptors, basically anything that interferes with that process. And there can be lots of ways it can be done. This initiation and inhibition happens thousands of times a day throughout the body and just modulates and maintains the body, not too aggressively, not too timidly, just perfectly. So when these chemicals or from whatever source they are and interfere with that normal function of the endocrine system, that causes problems. And then, so how long have they been around? I will say probably as long as hormones have been around. And I say that because one of the first hormone disruptors came from plants. We call them phytoestrogens. People are familiar, most people are, with the estrogenic effects of soy, flaxseed, chia seeds. Those all have a pretty significant estrogenic component to them. So those have been around a long time. So that kind of starts out with that. And then as we got into the 1800s, we got the first pesticides were, there was a product called Paris Green and lead arsenate in the late 1800s, discontinued. Obviously, most of these that were first introduced, we realized pretty quickly, wow, there's a problem there. Middle 1900s really took off a steep rise in endocrine disruptors with the advent of the petrochemical plastics and film industry and the additives that they put in to make those plastics softer. Also pharmaceuticals, as those got developed and those get dumped into the system. Consumer products like cosmetics, face creams, personal care products contain parabens, things for fragrance, phthalates, triclosan. These are some of the products. And then, of course, there's all the new herbicides like atrazine and the ever popular glyphosate, Roundup.
Okay, so let's talk about these endocrine disruptors and what they're doing to our body. So you mentioned how they are, they fit like a lock and key, and they're these messengers that tell our body what to do. But are some of these endocrine disruptors messing with our estrogen levels? Are estrogen levels increasing due to these?
These things disrupt and confound the system in a number of ways. One of them is just the fact that, okay, if structurally a hormone disruptor is similar to the estrogen molecule similar to this kind of four rings there, and it fits on the receptor and it has estrogenic activity, then it will take its place there. And usually its estrogenic activity, almost always, is far less than what the receptor was meant for, which is estradiol. While it's there, though, estradiol can't get to it. So, and it has its effect, but doesn't do near what it should. And then there's those that just block the receptor and don't do anything, and they're probably worse. There are disruptors that affect the synthesis and metabolism of hormones. There are those that affect enzymes that are necessary in the endocrine system. They can even modify genetic expression in there. So there's a lot of ways that they can get in there and disrupt feedback mechanisms. But we need to think about it. And this might be a good time to talk about soy. Gosh, I did a reel on that, and man, did I get a lot of
I'm sure. A
lot of angry feedback actually from people who believe, and the reason they believe that soy is good is because it does have an effect on estrogen beta receptors, which is good. But here's what you have to consider when you're talking about a hormone and a receptor. There are a few different factors that can play in here. One is the affinity of the receptor or of the substance, if it's a hormone or it's a disruptor, its affinity for the receptor, those vary. Its potency as an agonist, when it does get in there, does it have a strong effect or is it more weak? And then on the receptor side, there's how many receptors are there and how sensitive are they to that ligand, they call it. So all of these things come into play. And then there's the law of mass action too. So if there's a whole bunch of them, then they're more likely to find a place in a receptor to bind to. But in most cases, when we talk about estrogens, they're weaker than estradiol, but they still get in there and they'll mess with it. And then you have receptors that are occupied but no or much less physiological effect. And so that is the problem with soy. I don't take issue with the fact that it has some beneficial effects, but when it gets in the way of your God-intended estrogen that receptor was made for, it's not going to have the same potency and, take and do everything that it's supposed to do. And so really what you're doing is you're trading out something ideal for something okay.
Okay, well, let's talk about endocrine disruptors because besides soy, let's talk about other things. Basically, endocrine disruptors then are these things we're finding in plastics and personal care products that basically mimic our real hormones. And so then our real hormones can't do the job that they need to do with the cell. They're not messaging to the cell exactly what to do. And so let's talk about these endocrine disruptors in personal care products. You touched upon them just really briefly, but why are we still seeing so many endocrine disruptors in personal care products today?
It's a matter of money. The whole regulatory system in this country, in the U.S., it's bewildering, quite honestly. Early on, we did have some fairly tight controls on these ingredients that would go into personal care products. They had to prove safety, and the company that was introducing it had to prove that. They passed a law that said, okay, the FDA has to approve these. The FDA got such a backlog that the industry there was an outcry from the industry saying, listen, we can't get products to market. This is, 2, 3, 4, 5-year backlog. So the FDA came up with a brilliant idea. We'll establish a program called GRAS, GRAS. I know you're familiar with that, Carlin.
Yep.
Generally recognized as safe. But the problem with it was, who gets to decide that?
They do.
They do, the manufacturer. They get to do their own testing, which they don't even have to submit to the FDA. And then they declare, this is generally recognized as safe according to our research and what we've done, our testing. And so on the market it goes. And then we don't hear anything about it again until and if there's a problem.
Yep.
Not particularly good way to do it, but it's what we have. It's what we're left with. So what that has done then has provided a system where the private sector now has to come up and become that watchdog. And they have organizations like Environmental Working Group. They're an example of someone who does testing consumer guide, consumer reports. There are several out there. Whatever you think of that arrangement, they have stepped up and done a pretty good job of that. And so that's the system we have. Why are those ingredients still in there? Because the FDA cannot require them to stop it. There have been some egregious problems in the past. And the FDA, all they could do is require them to list it on the label. An example was formaldehyde in a hair care product. Oh my gosh. They were still allowed to make it, but the FDA didn't have the authority to say you can't, which I don't quite understand how that works.
Well, there's still lots of beauty products out there today that have formaldehyde releasers in them.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to list those. I mean, you don't have to say formaldehyde releaser on the label. And so unless you know what those ingredients are that could be a formaldehyde releaser, you have no idea.
Right. And that was exactly the case, what you're talking about. It was a releaser. If it was formaldehyde proper, yeah, you'd have to list it. but it's something that comes in later, or is released later or formed later, so they don't have to. So it's a problem.
It is. Well, and phthalates are the same way, because phthalates are in beauty products to keep that scent lasting, for years and years. And you don't have to list phthalates anywhere on your label, but yet phthalates are a known endocrine disruptor.
They are, for sure. Phthalates have particular concern. Maybe I should talk about that now.
Yeah. Tell us why they are such a concern.
Let's go back to some embryology here, because this is where it has its real shocking and concerning issues. Week 8 to 12 is the time when we start to see genitalia differentiation between men and women. Prior to that, it's just a ridge, a genital ridge, not at all distinguishable whether this is male or female. At about week 8 or so, these primordial glands, which could go either way as ovaries or testicles, in the genetic male, the XY male, they start to release some testosterone from those glands. And that then differentiates it, forms a penis rather than a clitoris, the scrotum rather than the labial folds, starts to begin to develop into a phenotypic male. And what drives that is that release of testosterone, which converts to DHT, and it's actually DHT that does the signals this change. We realized, first in mice, that there is when phthalates are introduced during that critical reproductive window, it can suppress that testosterone release enough that the male does not what they call fully masculinize. And in other words, it just interrupts the process. If it gets started and then it's introduced later, it just kind of stops where it is. And so that's where we see defects like undistended testicles. They don't distend into the scrotum. There can be malformations of the penis and a change in what they call the AGD, the anal genital AGD distance. That's the distance between the anus and the penis or the clitoris. And the reason we mention that is because it turns out that is a direct indicator of future fertility.
Mm.
And we always like finding things that we can objectively look at and measure, and that are so it's a little bit of a look back. It says there was androgenic interruption, and going forward there's going to be a problem because we didn't finish fully developing, and therefore sperm count's going to be lower later in life.
Wow,
that's a big
fascinating deal. But yet not many people are talking about this.
No. And I go down to the restroom here in our building, and there's one of those, they call them air fresheners on the wall.
Yeah.
That, just does this rhythmic pump and squirts that out into the air. I took the cover down and pulled the can off and looked at it. Sure enough, the first ingredient's a phthalate.
Yeah.
No question about it. So I've got this running thing going with somebody in this building. I don't know who he is, but he turns it on, I turn it off. He turns it on, I turn it back off.
Maybe you should educate him why you're turning it off.
Well, if it's who I think it is, I think his daughters follow me, but he apparently disagrees. But you know what? Here's the thing. We do not need to subject ourselves to being gassed, not in that way anyway, in a restroom or anywhere in a closed space, not without our consent. And
right.
How do you give consent when no one understands? So it kind of all starts with, as you said, with education and for people to understand. And it's mind-blowing, isn't it, that these things are still so ubiquitous in all these products because they do a job and they're cheap. And so industry's going to keep doing it until they get sued, and that drives the process.
Yeah, they are cheap and it's easier to make, but these phthalates, I think, are so important for, one, pregnant women to be aware of, since you just told about that study, and two, teenagers. I feel like it's really messing with, these teenagers that are going through puberty and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Phthalates are a known androgen disruptors. So they're anti-androgenic. Androgen meaning the testosterone side of it. We talked about estrogen before. These ones hit the androgenic receptor, and at that time, that's a formative period. That's a window. It's opened and closed, and what's done there is permanent. The AGD is permanent. It never changes. So it's really important that people understand what's going on during that process, and most of them don't know. Some of them don't even know they're pregnant at that point.
That's really true. Well, okay, so pregnant women need to be aware of this, but let's talk about these endocrine disruptors and plastics, because we're a society that uses a ton of plastics. And so what are the endocrine disruptors and plastics that are causing issues?
There are also phthalates in plastics. What they are is they're what they call a plasticizer. It makes the plastic more soft and pliable. So that's its appeal. It's an additive. Plastics are polymers linked, these chains that are linked together in long chains, and then the phthalates are added in order to just affect the structure of it so that it meets the need for the industry. But what happens is when they heat up, they will leach out. They're not stably bound to that matrix that's the polymer. They're just kind of in there, and they're subject to escaping with heat. And when they're in contact with things like grease, oil, and especially warm water. So I always say, hot foods and plastics are just not a good combination.
That's why you should never microwave in plastic.
Never. Not even plastic that says microwave safe, by the way.
And we keep saying this over and over, but yet people will keep using plastic, dishes, plastic storage containers, things like that.
Yeah, and my favorite is the splatter guard plastic lid that they put over and heat that up time after time after time after time.
Yep, it's crazy. Okay, but talking about plastics and heat, I saw this reel that you just recently did. And it's funny because my employees came and showed me the reel, because I am constantly asking them, what do you think's happening to that Costco chicken as it's sitting in a plastic bag under a heat lamp? And they're like, oh my gosh, I never thought about that. And I'm like, I don't think people think about that. They just think, oh, I need a rotisserie chicken and they're delicious, so I'm going to grab this. So, yeah. So what, did you ever hear back from Costco?
Nope. And it's been about 10 days or so. So I've fallen into the same category as a lot of journalists that I've seen do pieces on this, and that is they're not getting any answer. The thing is with this one, Carl, I don't know if it's bad. That is part of the problem, but that is the problem. Can you be transparent and let's just know what type of plastic is being used? Because we don't know how to react to it. There's a pretty decent guide out there they're called RICs. Resin identification codes. Those are the little triangles that you see on the bottom of most plastics. And there's the better ones, 2 and 4 are better, 5 is best when you're looking at those, by the way. Yeah, but there isn't one on those bags from Costco. And Costco's not the only one using them. Let's not just vilify them.
Right.
They're just widespread. But you're right, people don't think about it. And I hate to make people panicked about everything that you feel like, oh my gosh, I got to watch everything. Well, you kind of do, but you make these changes as you can incrementally, but everybody is entitled to education, and then make their own choice, which is a big part of my reason for being on social media, is empowering you to say, I decide. And you can't decide if you don't have the right information in front of you.
Well, that same frustration gets me frustrated in the manufacturing world, because you don't have to list so many things on your labels. And it drives me crazy. I mean, natural flavors is one of them, where you can hide a bunch of things. And most things are made with GMO corn sprayed with glyphosate, but yet they don't have to label that. And I'm like thinking, well, what if you have a corn allergy? You're not even given the opportunity to know whether or not you should have this product because it's not listed on there. And I mean, I could go on and on about companies using canola oil and vegetable oil as a processing agent, but because it's a processing agent, they don't have to list it. You know what I mean? It's just, let's be transparent. Just tell people what's in the stuff so they can make the decision.
I so agree. And one of your questions that you asked, what can people do in their communities? And what I like to say is, rather than advocate for changes in laws or changes in policies, although, hey, do it if you can, and if you have support to do it, fine. But it's a much harder road, I got to say. But what is easier is to advocate more for clearer labeling. That doesn't get as much pushback. You're going to get industry pushback, no question about it. But when you do that, then at least people and these private enterprises that I told you about can come to your aid there, like apps like Yucca and Healthy Living. I don't even try and tell people to remember which are hormone disruptors and which aren't, just because there are so many of them. Just go to an app and just see what it says. If it says suspected hormone disruptor, to me, that's good enough, because sometimes we can't do the testing to prove that it's causative. It's unethical. And all they can do is epidemiological studies or observational studies and say, well, we know, and that's how they did it with phthalates in women in pregnancy, turns out phthalates, there's a very clear record of their use in the urine. So they tested the urine, so they know that they were on board. But did they cause that issue? Well, it can't be definitively stated. Sometimes that's all we get. And to me, if there's another alternative that you can pick from, then just avoid it.
Well, and there are a few main endocrine disruptors that I always am trying to teach people to stay away from, like parabens, phthalates, glyphosate. I mean, like you said, there are a lot, but I'm like, at least if they know of some major key players, the BPA, then that helps a little bit, I have a question though about the plastics, because we got off got on a tangent, but really quickly with plastics, you said 2-4 is good, 5's better. Are there certain numbers that are completely stay away from?
The ones, polystyrenes, that's the foam type things. You want to stay away from that. Anything in the 6 category, it's easier to remember 2, 4, and 5. The rest,
just stay away from.
Stay away from them.
Okay, good to know.
Whenever it's possible. And, I say that because, life has to go on. You do what you can with what you've got.
Yep. No one is perfect, but if we are educated, we can make better decisions, is what it comes down to. Right.
Some of these things you can't help, like BPA, it's not in plastic bottles much anymore. It used to be in the liners of cans, and canning industry has kind of gone away from it. Replaced it sometimes with BPS and BPF, just as bad. So that's not good. But what you don't realize is it's in electronics, plastics. So it's in cars, in the interior of your car and the dash, all of that to make it supple and so that it doesn't crack in the sun. All those things are plasticizers, additives, and you don't know those are there. So that begs the question, what am I going to do with that? Replace my dash? Well, no. But what you can do is you can filter the air in your car. So there are things you can do. But yeah, it's these things that come at us from hidden sources that are especially alarming and that contribute to this additive load I was talking about before that makes it, wow, okay, all these things together are really piling up.
Well, and that's where the education comes in, because like you said, we can't control all of them, but the ones we can control can lessen that massive load. Let's take a quick break to hear from our show sponsor. Switching to a more toxin-free lifestyle is a challenge, and some swaps are harder than others. One of the swaps that has been hard for me is finding a laundry detergent that cleans my clothes and leaves them smelling good. Thanks to my loyal listeners and followers, I learned about Truly Free. Truly Free creates both laundry and home cleaning products for families who want family-safe, non-toxic cleaning solutions that actually work. Truly Free is free from chlorine bleach, phosphates, 4-dioxane, and harmful fragrances. I am getting the results I want without any of the dangerous chemicals. Truly Free offers refillable and reusable packaging, which empowers families to reduce their environmental footprint. Get real cleaning power with absolutely zero scary ingredients. Use code JUSTINGREDIENTS at trulyfreehome.com today. Now back to the show. Okay, I want to talk about pesticides though, because I've actually brought this up before that pesticides, especially glyphosate, is an endocrine disruptor, and people were not happy about that. They, want to claim that glyphosate is just fine. There's no issues with it. So, are there pesticides that are endocrine disruptors?
There are more of them that are than that aren't. When you talk about glyphosate, the evidence there is not as strong for it as a hormone disruptor, so I would put it in the suspected category.
Okay.
Which is enough for me. But look, that might make it a moot point when you say, but the toxicity in other areas really trumps that. It's how many billions of dollars has Monsanto or Bayer now paid out in damages from that? You don't do that in the billions of dollars if there isn't something going on. There are cancer issues, cancer risks with that are undisputed in my mind. Undisputed. Right. Atrazine. That is a known hormone disruptor. And that is the second most widely used herbicide after glyphosate in this country. It's been banned in several countries. In fact, there's some interesting information on that. In Germany, they banned atrazine in 79, I think. And then they tested 20 years later, and in the drinking water, groundwater, and the levels were the same.
Oh, wow.
This tells you how persistent these things are in the environment. That's one of the problems with atrazine. Atrazine actually breaks down fairly decently in soil, but once it gets into water, it just stays there. So even if there is a question, if some people have a question as to its safety, I'm not comfortable with the fact that it is ever present. It's building. It's going up. It's been banned in a lot of other countries, not here. 16 million tons are spread across the fruited plains of the United States, farming areas.
Wow.
You can look at maps, and it's kind of condensed in the central or the Midwest, corn areas. But why? Well, it's lobbying pressure. It's pressure from these industries, and the regulatory agencies, they just cave.
Well, and it's so frustrating that they're banned in other countries, but not here in America. We just keep allowing all this stuff.
Yep, we allow it, and we'll continue to as long as there's that political pressure. Pretty powerful.
Yeah, it is powerful, and I don't think that pressure is going away anytime soon. So it comes down to the consumer being educated as to what they're buying and what they're putting in their body.
Exactly, and we call that precautionary consumption. It's kind of what we're left with in the end, and it's a shame in some ways, but that yet, really, this is my point, that you cannot afford anymore to outsource in a broad way your life anymore. The Industrial Revolution and now it's been exponential, the climb in number of products. 80,000 or so chemicals been introduced into the market. That's huge, and you're going to have to take it on yourself because nobody's going to do it for you. And there's been no better time to do it than now when we have these apps where these people can sit and examine these things and look at the research, and so you don't have to keep up because housewife, house husband, whoever's doing the shopping, you don't have time to take a big old book along with you. But it's nice if you can scan a UPC code and get information on it.
I had an environmental scientist on here, and she was talking about those 80,000 chemicals, and she's one that tests some of those chemicals, but she said they have only tested 1% of those chemicals. And so she's like, you have to, as the consumer, be aware because we haven't had the time or the money or the resources given to us to go test those chemicals. So we have no idea their compounding effect, when they're mixed with other things and how many are put on your body and things like that. And so thought that was very interesting.
Yep. Well, they've made the decision that that's not where they're going to allocate resources. So
exactly,
like it or not, it's what we're left with. So we've got to know that to outsource that to somebody like big chemistry, big ag, big food, they don't have your back. They just don't.
Okay, can we talk about, I think now people understand endocrine disruptors, understand where they can find them. But can we talk about maybe things they affect with our physical health? For instance, weight gain. Do they play a role in people's weight gain?
Absolutely, they do. Disruptors that interrupt thyroid, especially, because thyroid is so tied to metabolism. But also, we know that testosterone, estradiol, progesterone, DHEA, and thyroid, all of these things will, in the proper doses and levels, will reduce fat, especially visceral fat, which is that's belly fat, the beer belly. That fat is internal, it's visceral, it's up against the organs. That's the most harmful kind, and those hormones are all good at reducing that. So you want to get in the way of that? I don't think so. They say menopause is about generally a 5-pound experience for most women that are not on bioidentical hormones. But if you replace those hormones and keep them where they ought to be, which is the opposite of having them disrupted,
Right,
and not be able to reach their receptor site, then you're going to manage that weight better, and especially in a healthy way. It's not just superficial fat. It's the deep visceral fat that's hard to lose. I'm going to read to you what testosterone does. Sex drive, sexual performance and sensitivity, assertiveness and self-confidence, stamina and endurance, better response to exercise and muscle mass, tone and strength, lower body fat percentage, increased bone density and strength, improved mood, well-being, and energy, fertility, improved insulin sensitivity and metabolism, improved cognitive function, better skin quality, and then in men, of course, sexual development and erection quality. Hey, you want to get in the way of any of those? I don't, it's all positive. People ask me, what are the side effects of hormones? Well, if you get too much, then you can have too much of a good thing. And you don't want to do that. But at physiologic levels, there are none. These are what has sustained you your whole life. Estrogens, if you block estrogens, this is what estrogens do: sexual development, cycle regulation, reproductive health, better vaginal health and lubrication. And then in both genders, improved and maintains heart health, reduces risk of dementias and Alzheimer's, reduces risk of macular degeneration, which is the most common cause of blindness in age-related vision, reduces colon cancer risk, better skin thickness and elasticity, better hair health, better memory and learning, decreased depression and anxiety, improved metabolism, better fat distribution. It's when you know and understand how important hormones are and that they go far beyond sexual things, then you start to realize, wow, I don't want anything messing with those things. I don't want anything getting in the way, causing problems there.
Well, so I'm assuming if they play a role in weight gain, they obviously are going to play a role in reproductive issues, but why?
So we talked about what phthalates can do to a developing male fetus. It can have the same effects, or it can also have effects on the female fetus. And this is where we're most concerned, honestly, is in that in utero situation where you got organ development and it's just such a vulnerable window, shall we say. If females get too much, if they get over masculinized, then they can develop problems with their own fertility. They also measure that AGD in females and in men, by the way, it's at least 50 or 100% longer than in females. But if that's also a measure of their fertility. When they get older, they will have problems too early of puberty, which can mean their whole fertile period is shifted. They'll get into menopause sooner. Their egg quality will deteriorate sooner.
Well, you're seeing younger girls. I mean, I'll have parents write in saying it was 3rd or 4th grade, that these young little girls are starting puberty. And so it goes to probably, a lot of what you're talking about, these endocrine disruptors.
In 1997, 27% of African American girls and 7% of white girls were showing breast development and or pubic hair at age 7.
Wow, that's early.
Those are second graders.
Yeah.
This is not good. And is there going to be a new pediatric section in the period supplies aisle? Another thing that's even more alarming is that there can be changes in females that they undergo in utero that then are passed on to their daughters. It'll be genetic changes, and specifically when we talk about PCOS, because if a mother has PCOS, she'll have higher levels of androgens that can be too high for females in the uterus while they're developing, and then they develop it themselves. Another example of that particular genetic side of it is we know that men that smoke will have a 15% reduction in their fertility or sperm count. If the man's mother smoked while he was in the uterus, he has a 40% reduction in his sperm count that is irreversible. The 15% guy, he can stop smoking and that'll come back up. If it's done while he's in that formative stage in the uterus, that's permanent and it's much higher. When you look at an app and it tells you this is a hormone disruptor, usually it will tell you what kind. If it's an anti-androgenic, or if it's estrogenic or anti-estrogenic, and then you can have a little bit more information or clarity as to what it's likely to do. But you don't want anything interrupting your testosterone. There's a feedback mechanism with that illustration that I gave you about the muscle mass and the guy that starts his regimen. At any point in that they call it an axis, if you interrupt that, then the whole system is confused and it doesn't know what to do. So it just stops sending that message, and then you don't get what you're after. So
Interesting. That can be a huge problem.
Mm-hmm. It can be a huge problem.
I talk about depression and anxiety quite a bit on my page, and depression obviously has so many different root causes as to why someone could be dealing with depression, but I know some depression can be due to hormonal issues, which then could be linked back to endocrine disruptors, correct?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Specifically, depression and anxiety. Those are two areas in menopause that we see regularly. When I see patients, they will often be on an antidepressant and then something to help them with anxiety or also for sleep. Fatigue. They're having trouble with that. So it's very commonly treated with an antidepressant when really, actually, it responds to hormones. And vice versa, when you interrupt and you decrease that contact with those receptors, you can start to see more and more depression.
So maybe instead of getting on those medications, they should get on a bioidentical hormone.
Yeah. Yep.
And we could do a whole episode on bioidentical hormones. That's a whole nother topic.
You can't overstate the importance of maintaining those levels, and it's sad because there's such misinformation out there about this. There's a lot of the professional associations, still they're starting to finally come away from it, but still maintain that you should be on hormones only long enough to take care of your symptoms and then stop.
Oh, interesting.
I could not disagree more. Maintaining these lifelong is not unhealthy. It's not risky. It's not dangerous. And in fact, it's the opposite. It's protective.
Well, that's good to know. Okay, so we've talked about some symptoms or things that these endocrine disruptors may cause in people. But do you think that these endocrine disruptors impact people at different stages of life differently, meaning childhood versus teenagers versus adulthood?
For sure. And my biggest concern there, honestly, is prenatally, because of the reasons that I've said and things that can happen there that can be irreversible and can be really quite tragic. And then the second concern, biggest concern I have is in children, honestly. And people don't give a lot of thought to that. But there is what they call a mini puberty that occurs in the first 2 months, and both boys and girls, young babies. And there's a surge of estrogen for females and testosterone for boys. And the child development people understand this well. It sort of sets the stage for how they see it in their play, and sort of how they identify. And this might be a good time to just touch on gender fluidity, a risky area to even mention, but I will, because I believe that talking about it in this context medicalizes it and can actually legitimize what some people are really struggling with the dysphoria. And as we go back to the discussion about phthalates in the brain and when it differentiates genitalia, it's also differentiating in the brain. And they've done studies that it's really interesting. There was a study done on Tylenol that actually, and the way they show that Tylenol has some anti-androgenic effects is we know that at about 30 months, boys and girls are different in that there's a language delay in about half of the boys. Meaning they don't know more than about 50 words. Girls are way ahead of that, as a rule, this is. But then they found that so they didn't introduce this because that would be unethical, but in observational studies, which, as I mentioned before, they can tell by looking at urine if that was present, if phthalates were present and if Tylenol were present. In those cases where Tylenol was there and phthalates were there in a high concentration, the boys were the same as the girls. In those cases where it was low, then they saw that difference. Then they saw that gender difference. Isn't that interesting? That's
very interesting.
Proves that, wow, okay, we don't really have anything else to attribute this to. I didn't know Tylenol had that effect, but it does. So it can decrease.
I didn't either, actually.
Yeah. So they're at this point. I mean, as I said, it's hard to prove causation on these things, but they are at the point where they're saying probably best to avoid Tylenol if you can, and especially in the first trimester of pregnancy.
Wow, that is really interesting. That's good to know. That's something I did not know. So as we wrap up here, I know the listeners have learned a lot about endocrine disruptors and different things that it can affect with their health. But what simple, actionable steps do you have for people who are maybe just learning about these things or wanting to do better with their health?
If we just paint a picture of gloom and doom here and don't give people ways that they can, practical ways they can do something about this, it's kind of like writing a movie that has a bad ending. And there are ways, there are things that we can do, and I do want to be really clear about that. Let me just say what I do. I'll just list the things. Number one, I buy organic, and a lot of people say buy organic if you can afford it. What I say is, you know what? Organic food is the price of food. The other stuff is artificially low. And it's artificially low because it's got all these chemicals that are helping them increase production and increase output and yield. So that's just what you have to do. This is what food costs. Get it whenever you can. And oftentimes it's not that much higher than conventional food, whether it's canned, packaged, or whatever. Buy fresh food in season whenever you can. Buy preserved food in glass containers over cans is what I prefer. And if you have to buy food in plastic containers, know your RIC codes. 2 and 4 are fine, 5 is best. Avoid hot foods in plastic. Store food in glass or silicone containers. Reheat and serve in glass or ceramic. No plastic in the microwave ever, even if it's microwave safe. Filter your drinking water. I guarantee you there's atrazine in your drinking water. It's everywhere. This is where, come on, it's going to follow the law of gravity, and it's going to go down into those aquifers and that underwater or underground water supply. Filter your water. What kind of filtration? Reverse osmosis or distilled. To me, those are the best. Vet personal care products with a good app like Buca or Healthy Living apps. Filter your air in your home with a HEPA filtration air purifier. I like the Allen line, ALEN. I've looked at a lot of them, and one of your big expenses is ongoing filter replacement. So I feel like there's a pretty good, and you got to size it for the area that you want it to cover. Okay. Avoid stain guard and fireproofing treatments on carpet and furniture whenever you can. So, these kind of things are, you can do this when it comes time to replace it. I'm not telling you to go out and, buy a new couch and recarpet your place, but have these things in mind. And then when the time comes, and if you have the opportunity, you can make a better choice. And then the last one, keep a clean house. Dust is packed with toxins and EDCs, endocrine disrupting chemicals.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is. They've done studies on that. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, that's really fascinating.
And I would add that to that your car as well. That came up. There was one study done. It said, what are the 5 worst places? And actually the worst one was your car because of all of the synthetic material that's in there. So you can get good car filtration systems too. And by the way, for your house, you can get a carbon filter, put that on your furnace too. Use a carbon one. And usually they say that's for pet odors and things like that, but it has carbon in it. Use that instead of just a cheap, regular, flimsy filter. And they're not that much more expensive.
I love all those doable, actionable steps. I mean, they are things that we can all do, and they can do them one at a time. Replace your plastic food containers to glass ones. When you're at Costco, they have a great option, and quit microwaving your food. There you go. That's free, doesn't cost anything. I mean, quit microwaving with plastic is what I meant to say. And it's free, right? So there's things that they can do that's no added expense. Dust your house, like you said. Things that people can do that are easy and not expensive. And so I love those steps. Thank you so much for being here today. I know the listeners have learned a lot, and I hope they're motivated to go switch a few things out. But you are so fun to watch on social media and listen to and learn from. And so tell my listeners where they can find you.
Well, I get a kick out of it. It's fun. People just get really worked up with things like that Costco video. Oh my gosh.
Yes, they do.
It has over 3 million views, and I'm going, oh my goodness, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so Instagram. It's hormone specialist at hormone specialist on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and then we have a podcast that we recently introduced, and I call it "You Chief Medical Officer," driving home my point that you need to be your chief medical officer.
Oh, love that.
And that's on Spotify, YouTube, and Amazon. Also, one other thing, if I might mention, is I've got a tool out there, an online tool that we call Hormone Disruptors My Exposure Score, that will take you through your home and help you identify those things. This is one of the first things you got to know. Where is this coming from? Where am I getting this exposure? So that will take you through there, give you a numeric score and a letter grade, and then also suggestions for, okay, now here's what you can do about it. And maybe I can have you put a link somewhere in show notes or something about
for sure.
How people can get access to that. It's free. So I think that is something that's helpful, and that's a little service I can provide.
Yeah, that's a great tool. And that even piqued my curiosity. I'm like, I'm going to go look at it and see what it says.
Now, you'll do well, I'm sure, but I'm telling people, don't get depressed over this. This is okay. When you learn something, then you can implement it as soon as you can and do better. But
exactly. Once you know better, then you can do better.
There you go.
So, well, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I always end my podcast with asking my guests what they have found to be the best ingredient in life. What would you say it is?
I would say love. It keeps you curious, tolerant, and humble.
Oh, I love that.
Well, then you can learn, can't you?
Yes, you can.
Humble and curious, you can learn. And I see so much of the opposite of that in the medical world, and it just upsets me. when we can learn and we can accept new information and be curious about it and entertain different ways of thinking, then that's what science is about, isn't it? Science is never static.
It is. And unfortunately, we've gotten to the point that people are not curious and just taking what has happened for years and years to be the absolute answer rather than being curious about new truths.
And then argumentative about it. Yeah.
Exactly. It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time. And again, you guys go follow him for a fun social media follow, and you will learn a lot from him. And again, thank you, Layne, for everything you're doing out there.
Thank you. And you as well. God bless you.
Thank you so much for listening. Remember to subscribe to the Just Ingredients podcast to learn more about your health and good ingredients to life. Plus, get daily tips at just.ingredients on Instagram.